Hello everyone, I'm still here. Timothy Gallwey's novel on competitive sports mentality titled The Inner Game of Tennis has kind of achieved meme status within the Smash and broader FGC community, but it does deserve its spot in the competitive mentality starter kit. Despite literally being about tennis, it's easily relatable and chock full of practical advice that applies to any sort of competitive endeavor. Given how broadly competitive life is, in school, the workplace, even in friendship and love, I've held on to a lot of the wisdom in this book and applied them to most aspects of my life. It's of course most directly applicable to competitive games like Smash, and having recently reread the book, I wanted to spend a few minutes sharing what were the most profound insights for me, hoping to clear up some of the mentality misconceptions within the Smash community. Before we begin, I want to introduce a key concept so we're all on the same page. Early in the book, Gallwey goes over a fairly common concept, this image of the two selves. Self 1 is your conscious mind, he calls it the thinker or the ego self. And then self 2 he calls the doer, it's the unconscious, it's the guy in charge when you're autopiloting. A piece of bad advice that got me stuck early on when I started playing Smash is to not autopilot. It's misleading at best, when taken out of context, and the actual advice is more like get a better autopilot. And the way that's achieved is by using your self 1 to evaluate if what you're doing is good or not. Don't autopilot during practice is perhaps closer to reasonable advice, but even then you have to be autopiloting the majority of your gameplay and using your thinking self to make adjustments in very specific situations. Gallwey talks about how having good mentality is a process that involves 1. Learning how to use your thinking self, self 1, to get a clear picture of your desired outcome in some situation. 2. Trusting your doing self, self 2, to do its best to achieve that desired outcome and learn from successes and failures. And 3. Learning to quiet the judgments of your self 1 when things aren't working out or even when they are. Instead, just seeing and understanding what is happening non-judgmentally so you can adjust your desired outcome and continue the learning process. So let's talk about this process and what it means to have a good mentality when learning and when competing. In Inner Game of Tennis, Gallwey talks about a few common types of competitors. For example, in the Smash community, there's always this guy who's just there for the crew, the social side of things. There's also a guy who says he doesn't care, he's not even trying, or the guy who picks a sub game 3 so he doesn't count when he loses, that guy who just johns at every opportunity. There's also the guy who tries too hard, he overtrains, he overprepares, and then he overthinks during sets to try and overcome his lack of confidence. There's also always a guy who's just trying to do everything perfectly, he cares more about his combos than actually winning, the guy who's just trying to put on a show. I've done a lot of competitive endeavors, sports, esports, academics, and I've seen those types in every discipline, and I've seen myself falling through these patterns as well. These are just manifestations of your ego. So let's talk about the ego. Another piece of poorly worded advice I've seen repeated again and again is to get rid of your ego, kill your ego, get above your ego. It's a common theme in any form of self-help discipline. Like in meditation, an early exercise is to try and take a step back and watch your thinking self and feeling self and dissociate yourself from it. You find that you can do that reasonably well, look at where your thoughts are coming from, look at what arises in your body and your consciousness, and you can try to avoid making judgments. But then you eventually realize that you can take another step back and watch the one that's watching yourself. Now you might see where this is going. It reminds me of this quote I just love, this image of a painter painting a landscape.
Now here's a painting of a landscape. Now the artist who painted that picture says something is missing. What is it? It is I myself who was part of the landscape I painted. So he mentally takes a step backward or regresses and paints a picture of the artist painting a picture of the landscape. But still something is missing, and that something is still his real self painting the second picture. So he regresses further and paints a third, a picture of the artist painting a picture of the artist painting a picture of the landscape. But because something is still missing, he paints a fourth and a fifth until he paints a picture of the artist painting 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 a landscape.
So infinite regression then is...
It is the moment when our artist has regressed to the point of infinity and himself becomes part of the landscape he painted and is both the observer and the observed.
Now that wasn't really the point in the movie, but the idea of infinite regression illustrates beautifully why, fundamentally, you can't get rid of your ego or get above your ego. The bottom line is you can't outsmart yourself or improve your mind, just like you can't lift yourself by your own bootstraps. Getting rid of your ego is a kind of one-upmanship that is in itself an ego trip, a vicious circle, an impossible task. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that you should just give in to your capricious ego. The lesson with meditation is that you're not able to get over your ego, but you're able to let go of your reactions to particular events and instead just seeing them for what they are. Being able to take a step back and forego judgments is exactly what Gallwey advocates in Inner Game of Tennis. He says that to have good mentality, quote, "The first skill to learn is to let go of the human inclination to judge ourselves and our performance as either good or bad," end quote. These judgments start a thinking process that break the focus of our play. It undermines the trust we should have in ourselves too, the unconscious self, to keep doing what works or to correct what doesn't work. These judgments can also become self-fulfilling prophecies, some experience you replay so many times in your mind that they become an expectation, and then yourself too lives up to those expectations because that's what it's meant to do. Like if you tell yourself you always choke in last hit situations, you always lose your lead, you're just reinforcing that kind of pattern of behavior. Now you might think, some things are in fact bad, in that they are undesirable, and letting go of judgments doesn't mean to ignore errors. Errors, mistakes, even slumps are just part of the learning process. They're not bad events per se, and only last so long as you keep judging them as so. On the other hand, we have positive thinking, which certainly is not as bad as negative thinking, but in the moment it doesn't really help your concentration either. You can easily notice this if you're in training mode and you're finally hitting that hard combo again and again. You start to think, I'm doing it, I'm getting it consistently, and immediately you mess up, right away. So with the goal of trusting yourself too, staying focused in the moment, we have to let go of judgments completely and notice things for what they are, simple like that. You aren't choking leads, you're losing the information war. Spot dodge cancel tilts isn't some brain dead OP mechanic, your attack timing is just too early. The next step of this process is trusting your inner self. When self 1 stops judging and trying to force the hand of self 2, we can start to appreciate the potential of our subconscious. Like a parent lets a child make its own mistakes even if they know better, you should let your self 2 do what thinks it's best, and this is where the natural learning happens. Trying to force a situation, trying real hard to make it happen, just tenses you up, results in awkward movement, uncharacteristic errors, and you don't really learn anything. When you let it happen, you might not get the result you want, but you'll learn in the process. With this in mind, the learning process should look something like this. You non-judgmentally observe something in your play. Maybe you think your disadvantage needs work, you get juggled a lot. Fine, observe what happens when you get juggled without judgment. See it for what it is, what option you picked, what they picked, what you could have picked instead. No need to think about it too hard. Then you picture the desired outcome. Maybe you watch another player in these situations, and again look at what happens, what everybody does, just noticing. Then you trust yourself too to do better in those situations, without forcing it to make changes, just letting the changes happen. And then you repeat the process, you non-judgmentally observe the changes and the results. One thing I should mention here is that the book is unequivocal when it comes to how mentality factors into the learning process. I often see people say, a big part of Smash is a mental game. It's all about mentality. Again, that can be misleading. Yes, poor mentality can cause you to underperform, and yes, it's hard to stay focused in the moment when so many crazy things can happen in and out of the game, when so many things can break your flow. But Gallwey never claims that the opposite is also true. You don't overperform by having better mentality. If you let go of judgments and believe in yourself too, you won't suddenly know how to deal with every situation that you haven't thought through. You're just opening the door for natural learning. It's a framework, but it doesn't do the work for you. In any case, when you're at a tournament, all you need to do is have relaxed concentration, and that comes from letting go of judgments and trusting yourself to do what you think is best. It's easier said than done. The mind seems to have a will of its own, and the only way to get better at keeping it focused on the game here and now is through practice. Whenever it wanders, you gently bring it back. Again and again, like reps at the gym, you can train your focus this way. During games, use an object of focus like your opponent to stay focused in the moment. And in between games, you can focus on your breathing or whatever works best for you. Whenever you think, I'm gonna lose this, I'm choking, bring the mind back. Or, that read was so good, I'm popping off, I can really win this, bring the mind back. You start to think, I was behind, but now I'm making a comeback. Yeah, maybe, but just bring the mind back to here and now, nothing is done yet. When you can do that, you can play in what people call the zone. You're in flow. You can get those moments where you're playing out of your mind. It's not about anything yourself one can do. There's no setup to be in the zone. A big realization for me was that making an effort to be focused isn't about trying hard. It's not about mental exertion. On the contrary, it's about letting go. It's a kind of gift you ask for by progressively getting better at letting go of judgments, and through humility, relinquishing control, or rather the control you wish you had, and instead trust your innate abilities. The gift isn't always given, but when it is, it's an amazing experience that's difficult to put into words. And that brings us to the last part of this discussion. Why do all this? Gallwey's book concludes with a discussion on the meaning of competition. At some point, you'll just go from playing Smash to doing things you really don't want to be doing, but it'll make you better at the game and help you win in the long run, so you know you ought to do them. It's kind of like running for hours to improve your endurance to get better at soccer or basketball or something. At some point, you went from being a casual player, just playing, to someone willing to go out of your way to improve and compete at a higher level. But why? I think several mental blocks stem from competing for the wrong reasons. I'd say most people are trying to prove themselves, either to themselves or to others. And this isn't really something unique to Smash or sports competition. It's easy to wrap your self-worth into the pursuit of some achievements. But the bottom line is that winning your local, or winning a major, or getting some degree, getting a promotion, this kind of status chasing might bring you some momentary satisfaction, but none of them will really make your anxieties melt away. So what's the point then? Why go through all the struggle to compete if reaching your goal isn't going to bring you bliss? Is it just about enjoying being in the flow? Well, that's certainly enjoyable in the moment, it's very satisfying, but not really something you can chase, and Gallwey suggests that there's something more to it with this passage. He talks about why surfers do it. Quote, "The surfer does want to ride the wave at the beach, yet he waits in the ocean for the biggest wave to come along that he thinks he can handle. If he just wanted to be in the flow, he could do that on a medium-sized wave. So why does the surfer wait for the big wave? The answer was simple, and it unraveled the confusion that surrounded the true nature of competition. The surfer waits for the big wave because he values the challenge it presents. He values the obstacle the wave puts between him and the goal of riding the wave to the beach. Why? Because it is those very obstacles, the size and churning power of the wave, which draws the surfer to his greatest effort. It is only against the big waves that he is required to use all his skill, all his courage and concentration to overcome. Only then can he realize the true limits of his capabilities. At that point, he often attains his peak. In other words, the more challenging the obstacle he faces, the greater the opportunity for the surfer to discover and extend his true potential. The potential may have always been within him, but until it is manifested in action, it remains a secret hidden from himself. The obstacles are a very necessary ingredient to this process of self-discovery. Note that the surfer in this example is not out to prove himself, he is not out to show himself or the world how great he is, but he is simply involved in the exploration of his latent capabilities. He directly and intimately experiences his own resources and thereby increases his self-knowledge. This may seem a little trite, but it is the process of self-discovery when trying to overcome some obstacle that is the true reward of competition. The bigger the obstacle, the larger the goal, the more self-discovery of your capabilities is required and the bigger the reward. Not because of the goal itself, but rather the process. In that sense, competition is in fact cooperation. You want opponents who play well, who push you to your limits. You want to abuse your opponent's weaknesses and vice versa, because you then both become stronger. You have to let go of this notion that to go up, you have to push someone else down. Sure, that's what it looks like when you look at brackets, but not when it comes to the inner game. We can push each other up by playing at our best, and in that sense, your self-worth is unrelated to whether you win or lose in the end, and your self-respect should not depend on how well you perform in relation to others. Gallwey's final piece of advice is as simple as it is fundamental. Paraphrasing, he says that in tournament matches, just play every interaction to win. In Smash, that could mean win some information, win some stage control, maybe take a stock. The point is, don't worry about losing or winning the entire match. You should just be concerned with putting all of your efforts into trying to win every interaction, doing what needs to be done now. You can't control the outcome of a match, and trying will only lead to anxiety, frustration, and poor mentality. You can only control your efforts in the here and now. You can only do what you think is right to win this single interaction and move on to the next regardless of the actual outcome of this interaction. The inner game is this never-ending process of putting maximum effort in the here and now, which is done without strenuous exertion. It is done by simply letting go. I hope that this seemingly contradictory statement makes a bit more sense now. While rereading the inner game and making this video, I kept thinking about how simple this all was and how easy it makes it sound. But that couldn't be farther from the truth. Unraveling all the unique ways our ego tries to take control is not a simple task. It's an endless inner game that we play to maximize our chances of winning the outer game. It applies to pretty much every aspect of our lives, which is why I really recommend going through the inner game of tennis. It's full of anecdotes and examples that really help make these concepts sink in. I've only scratched the surface here. In any case, if you thought this video was helpful to you, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, share it with your friends who you think might need it. I am by no means an expert, so please share your own experiences with the inner game, any advice or questions, in the comments or through Twitter, Discord. Until then, keep practicing and doing your best moment by moment.